I'm going to try to convince you that buying a cheap vocal microphone might be the best thing to do if you're a beginner just starting out with vocal recording. Most people will recommend that you go out and get a nice condenser microphone to use for your vocal recordings. And while they are great pieces of equipment, what they fail to tell you is that they also introduce some issues that you have to think about. When you listen back to the recordings on a condenser microphone, you might find out that there's a lot more things happening there than what you expected. Some of the things that can show up are the echo from the small room that you're working in, or the noise from a computer fan that's sitting right next to your desk, or the noise from an HVAC or air conditioning system cutting on or off while you're making your recording. So when you do hear all those extra noises, you have to start thinking about ways to get rid of those noises. So to deal with the echoes in the small room that you're working in, you might have to think about things like sound absorption. So building sound absorption panels and hanging them on the walls around your room. You have to do some extra research, and you might have to purchase some extra gear that you weren't expecting to. And for the fan noise from your computer, you might have to figure out how do you set up the microphone so that you don't get the noise from the fan from your computer, or the same thing with the HVAC. These are all extra things that you didn't think about, or that you maybe don't want to think about as a beginner when you're first starting out. So another option that people will throw out is just go ahead and get a dynamic microphone. It doesn't have as many of the same issues as a condenser microphone. And I do think dynamic microphones are a great idea, but usually the ones that people suggest are things like the Shure SM7B or the Electro Voice RE320. And while those are great microphones, what they forget to tell you is that you actually have to get some extra gear to get the best quality out of those microphones. So things like the Shure SM7B, you have to get an extra box, which is like a preamp, to help you get a better signal so that you have usable levels for when you're trying to do your vocal recordings. And it's extra gear, it's extra expense that you didn't expect to have to deal with. But there actually is one more dynamic microphone option that I think a lot of people overlook, and it's the little brother to the Shure SM7B. It's called the Shure SM57 microphone. It's also a dynamic microphone, and it has a few advantages over its bigger brother, the 7B, because you don't have to get the extra preamp, you don't have to get the extra cables in order to get the best quality out of it. It's a pretty simple setup. It's just an XLR cable, the actual microphone, and an audio interface. And the audio interface is going to provide you with plenty of gain for what you need to do for your vocal recording. And because it's a dynamic microphone, you don't have to worry as much about room noise, because it's really intended to be used in close range, which means you don't get a lot of the reflections from around the room. So whether or not you have your room perfectly treated or not doesn't really matter with the SM57. So that means that you don't have to run out and buy a whole bunch of acoustic panels in order to treat your room for sounds that you didn't expect to have coming into your vocal recordings. And it even has this feature that allows you to create your own noise canceling without any extra gear. It's just a built-in feature. And that feature is the pickup pattern of the actual microphone. So it has this point on the back side of the microphone that's really like a void for sound. It's called a null. And what that means is if you point the back of the SM57 at a source of noise that you don't want to have in your recording, that null actually prevents most of that sound from actually getting into the microphone. That's pretty cool, right? And the amazing thing about this microphone is it only costs around $100. And I know what you might be thinking, like, is it possible for this microphone to even sound good for just $100? Well, the SM57 actually has a history of being used on some pretty well-known records. Maybe you've heard of a little band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Well, there's a rumor that the lead vocal for Californication was actually recorded on an SM57. Or maybe you've heard about a band called The Killers. All of the lead vocals on that entire album were recorded on an SM57. And that album has sold over 7 million copies and was nominated for a Grammy the year that it came out. Or how about Fleetwood Mac? Maybe you've heard of them. Well, rumor has it on their album Rumors, you see what I did there? That some of the vocal takes were actually done on an SM57 that made it into the final record. And that record has sold more than 40 million copies and won a Grammy for the best album of the year when it was released. So maybe, just maybe, the SM57 might be worth checking out as a beginner. It eliminates you having to think about a lot of extra things when you're first starting out. and you don't have to buy a bunch of extra gear just to make it work. I personally have been using an SM57 to do a lot of vocal recordings lately, and I'm actually really liking the results that I'm getting from it. Now granted, it's not the only microphone that I use for vocal recording, but it is a very simple setup to use. And next week I'm going to walk you through this very simple setup that I use with the SM57. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next round.